Yo, what up, everybody? It's your boy Carson Fox with another edition of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports. We're taking a look back at the entirety of the 2023 season. I told you after the Duke's Mayo Bowl game just a couple of days ago that I was going to bring you a video to kind of wrap the entire season, break down the context of this season and what it means in the bigger picture of West Virginia football, the program and what it means for the future, and like looking back on what was a fun season at the end of the day in 2023. So coming off that Duke's Mayo Bowl victory, I'm still riding high. I hope you all are too, enjoying your holidays and looking forward to 2024 and just a couple of them. So for today's episode, I kind of want to give you my initial thoughts. Going back, let's go back like 8-9 months to kind of look about how this roster was constructed, in large part due to the assistance of Country Roads Trust and the impact that the Trust made for this season on its retention and transfer recruiting efforts. We'll go game by game and what we learned each game in the storyline of the season and put it into context of what it meant in that game and that performance for this team. We'll take a look at Neal Brown and staff's improvement from 2019 to today, and what are some of the areas that West Virginia definitely improved for all of those naysayers out there who say that, what is the improvement by Neal Brown in these last 5 seasons. Take a look back at some of the predictions, how West Virginia performed offensively and defensively, and where I compared them to in August. We'll look at these position groups, group by group, and what were some of my thoughts on the standout players in those positions, good and bad. And then just kind of a summary and look at what Neal Brown and staff needs to do between now and the start of next season, August 31st, already counting down to it, home at against Penn State, to put himself and West Virginia in the best position to be successful in 2024. So, starting it right off, I found it very difficult in doing the research for this show to compare this season storyline and results to any in recent or modern West Virginia football history. I mean, to find that Neal Brown in his 5th season, after having a little bit of positively in year 2 in 2020 and winning a bowl game, getting 6 wins, to now then slide back, then get into year 5, have the conference worst expectations by the media and outside voices, but then go and win 9 games, including the finale, a bowl game, also including beating Pitt, but not beating a ranked opponent with just one win over a team with a winning record, and that being Texas Tech. Very hard for me to compare this 2023 season to any that I can think of my lifetime, and even as I look back through the Don Nehlen era, Frank Signetti era, Jim Carlin era, the only year that I thought could even kind of compare was 1968, but still a 7-3 season for the Mountaineers, who had turned independent after leaving the Southern Conference in 1967. Seeing a season where they did beat Pitt, did have losses to Kentucky, Virginia Tech, Penn State on their schedule, and then just beating a bunch of other teams that you think that West Virginia in context would be better than. Villanova, the Citadel, VMI. So maybe. And then that parlayed into 1969, West Virginia going 10-1, getting to the Peach Bowl, winning that bowl game. So I guess that's what I would say is this season in 2023 kind of felt like season 2 of Game of Thrones, if you're a Game of Thrones fan. I think there was a lot of character and plot development with a few action-packed moments here and there that, have you locked in, wanting more and more each and every week, and now leaving you hanging for a 2024 season, which you think can be on an upswing, like West Virginia was in 2018, 2012, 2006. Hard to compare this team and what it did this year against the 2005 Sugar Bowl game, but you know what I mean, is on an upswing, looking for more. So I think the reasons to be optimistic, with the good outweighing the bad, and really just enjoying the season for what it was, is how I feel. Just the 20th time, as I've mentioned a number of times, in over 130 years of West Virginia football, that the Mountaineers won 9 or more games in a season. But I'm still a little bit skeptical I'm wanting to see more between here and next August before I'm starting to say that West Virginia can be a Big 12 conference contender, national contender in the college football playoffs. But I would just say ultimately, if about 5 minutes in here, it's enjoyable that for what feels like the first time in a long time that West Virginia fans seem, dare I say it, content, not having like a coach that's on the hot seat or looking to leave for greener pastures, and we're talking about the coaching carousel. I just feel like, again, to use another term from Game of Thrones, the realm is at peace, even if it's just for this week, or if it lasts 6 months and or something happens during this off season. Fingers crossed, knock on wood that it doesn't. But it just seems like for right now, like, okay, it's good, and it's a good time to be a West Virginia fan for what seems like in a long time, that you can walk around with a West Virginia logo on your shirt with pride, with passion, and just be happy. So I think let's look back at this season in totality. And I think you've got to go all the way back to late last winter into the spring and give a lot of credit to Country Roads Trust and how West Virginia's athletic department did with high school and transfer recruiting and retention. They got to get their just due credit, I feel like, in the context of this 2023 season. Get them some bowl championship rings as well. They deserve it because, as I said in a few videos ago, after Ren Baker gave Neal Brown his vote of confidence for the 2024 season, saying there wasn't going to be any sort of head coaching change, no matter what happened over the course of, I think it was either Cincinnati and Baylor game, or at least the Baylor game and then a bowl. So you can go back on my channel and take a look back at that video and reference I talked about just a few weeks, it was a month between the last game, so it's going to be probably about 6 weeks ago. But the big three portal losses over the offseason for 2023 was Caden Prather, wide receiver, Jordan Jefferson at nose tackle, and Charles Woods at corner. And how did West Virginia make up for that? Well, with Prather, you signed Devin Carter from NC State and Cole Taylor, a tight end, albeit a tight end, from LSU. And seeing freshman emergences from Traylon Ray, a 4-star wide receiver, and Hudson Clement, who was a walk-on, but a guy who just really exploded onto the scene and really developed great chemistry with Garrett Green for this season. In Jordan Jefferson, I think Mike Lockhart really stepped up at times. I think, like, in the same way that Jefferson made a push from 21 into 22, Lockhart made the same kind of push up from 22 to 23. And then Fatorma Mulba was an admirable backup from a transfer from Penn State and played quality snaps. And then Woods, you signed Montre Miller, who was at that time a higher rated Rivals transfer recruit than Woods was going to SMU. Miller coming from Kent State, but then found a consensus All-American, probably the transfer of the year maybe, especially out of a non-quarterback, I would say, All-American in Beanie Bishop. So I got to give him an A+ grade. Got to give everyone on the staff and Country Roads Trust for their efforts in bringing Beanie Bishop into this program, because he just made waves. Definitely one of the stars. I would say probably the defensive star of the entire season for the Mountaineers. So, but you also did huge moves in retention, signing C.J. Donaldson, getting Zach Frazier to turn away from Alabama and doubling his NIL opportunities and getting him to come back for an All-American season. Wyatt Milam at left tackle, Doug Nestor at right tackle. Then defensively, flip to that side of the ball, Aubrey Burks, Lee Koba, Sean Martin. This West Virginia defense wasn't just depleted like it was in 2021 and 2022 in the transfer portal, namely because of Jamal Adai at first Georgia and then Miami, stealing away Darryl Porter, Akeem Mesidor, Tyke Smith, and then some of the other exodus from the program, namely because it sounded like a bad culture at some position groups. So creating that culture, I felt like it started last off season and then built its way up through the efforts of retention and transfer portal recruiting. And then you just had a lot of true freshman guys. Not a lot, I guess I got 4 here. who made an impact on from the class of 2023. Jaheim White, what he did this year, Traylon Ray, Rodney Gallagher, and Ben Cutter. So kudos to those guys and their efforts in being a part of this young core for the future. So then, like I said, retention was finally there that wasn't there in 2020, in 2022. And we heard this past summer from Stephen Ford at Country Roads Trust on his interview with Brandon Phoenix from the Raspy Voice Kids that West Virginia spent $1 million in NIL on its 2022 roster. So was this 2023 roster $2 million? Did it double? I don't know. I don't think maybe we'll know that information this upcoming summer, but because that's not really necessarily public information, I can only speculate on it. But just to think, like, if 2022, you saw the results from that at $1 million, is it $2 million for this season's team? What's 2024 is going to be? Is it 4? Is it 5? So that is part of the conversation, unfortunately, for Division I Power 5 college football from here on out, that your money has to be there for your respective payroll of your program until we have any sort of guidelines, rules, regulations, anything in NIL for the foreseeable future. And who knows whenever that's coming. So I think there were 8 transfer grades, not only in Bishop, but Cole Taylor, Anthony Wilson at safety, and Michael Hayes, and what West Virginia was able to find with those gems that were maybe perhaps diamonds in the rough at, Taylor at a blue blood program but wasn't seeing the field. Wilson at Georgia Southern putting on an awesome career in the G5, and then same with Hayes, and then getting an opportunity at the P5 level. So then, first year starting players stepped up at so many different levels, including the fourth year starting quarterback in Garrett Green. So let me transition and let's talk about what did we learn in the context and how did it play into the season storyline game by game. So starting off week 1, that Penn State game, 38-15 loss in Happy Valley. First time in a long time that West Virginia had been back in central Pennsylvania to face the Nittany Lions. And I guess really when I look back on it, I just don't think that both Neal Brown was ready, and he said this too in some of his press conference, ready to unleash Garrett Green, but also that Garrett Green wasn't necessarily ready to be unleashed just yet, which I see as a criticism and a bit of dereliction of duty that comes up in the greater context of the 5 years that Neal Brown has been head coach, of not preparing Garrett Green both in 2021 and 2022 to be in this position for 2023, that he could have been better matured, better prepared for 2023 to come into that game and potentially light it up. But instead, very conservative, just felt like a few plays here and there that happened that weren't completions, that could have been big plays, that it could have changed the storyline from this game. But just overall, the offense had a nucleus, but it didn't have the kind of firepower that it potentially could have had. I would feel like by the end of the season to go into that game against Penn State and potentially and win it. So just wasn't ready. Wasn't ready. And again, whether Garrett Green as a second year, third year player had the maturity, had the I don't think there's any better word other than maturity to take it upon himself to be a starting quarterback leader of a Power 5 program, that you finally saw that during this 2020, during this season. That I think coming into that first week against Penn State, 100,000 fans. I know West Virginia had played in a big venue, the year prior in the Backyard Brawl, but again, that was JT Daniels, not Green. In this contest this year. So that's all I got to really say about that Penn State game. I feel like I didn't glean very much that I feel like that can be applied for this season, other than just that West Virginia, namely at quarterback, the most important position on the field, was not ready to play against. And I think if West Virginia could have played that game to 2 touchdowns or fewer, you would feel a lot better about it. But given the way, it ended up Penn State beating the spread, James Franklin taking advantage there in the last minute or so to get, from a 31, maybe 15 more respectable loss. All right, enough being said about Penn State. So I'm going to skip Duquesne, FCS opponent, move on to Pitt. I think that was a must-win game for Neal Brown. I said it then, and I'll say it today. And West Virginia won at the end of the day, despite not having Garrett Green, who got hurt on the offense's second play of the game. So I think you also learned in that game that West Virginia's defense had some chops, namely Aubrey Burks, Beanie Bishop coming away with interceptions, stifling Rodney Hammond, not letting Pitt get its ground game going, and not doing anything freaking stupid like you saw in 2022. So West Virginia circled the wagons, as I've said many a times about that game, relied on its defense, did just enough with Nico Marchiol at quarterback to win that game. C.J. Donaldson having a big touchdown in that one. So, and also I just think the past was in the past. 2022 in the rearview mirror with Pitt specifically, but also for that entire 2022 season, that this was going to be a different season. By getting that confidence, starting off the season on a right foot, yes, beating Duquesne, but then coming in there, beating your arch rival. That game was hugely hyped. There was a packed house of fans, gold and blue, striped the stadium in that atmosphere, and you had to win that game, and you went and you won that game. So beating Pitt in the backyard brawl, I don't care no matter the context of the season, for West Virginia is hugely important, and I think changed a corner for this team as it headed into these, I think, two most important games that I picked as preseason losses that they turned into wins and changed and flipped the script, I feel like, for the season. So Texas Tech and TCU, I think we can look at in a vacuum. What I'll take away from that 27-20 win against Texas Tech and 24-21 win against TCU is that West Virginia's defense continued to bail it out. But Brown was able to get the monkey off his back in Texas Tech, and winning on the road in conference play was indeed possible for this program. So two hugely important points, I feel like, that needs to be reviewed in the context of this season. I also think by Garrett Green playing on one day's practice reps and rest after Nico Marchiol got dinged up just a little bit before that TCU game, that apparently Green was going to sit out and Marchiol was going to start his second consecutive game in Fort Worth. I think Green coming out there and having the performance that he had against the Horned Frogs showed the kind of grit, showed the kind of leadership, and especially his rushing ability in that game was what was going to take West Virginia from a below average to average offense in 2022 to a above average of an offense in 2023. And I don't want to say it was one of the best offenses in the country. I don't think I can go that far just yet. I don't think that's a fair thing to say, but definitely his rushing ability and what he was going to bring to the table in tandem with C.J. Donaldson and this offensive line that was going to be one of the best in the country, you could contend. You could beat these teams like Texas Tech and TCU. But I think that TCU game was just just triage, that the West Virginia suffered consequences, paid a lot of pound of flesh in players that then affected them over the course of the next two games, and then for the rest of the season with some losing Trey Lathan to a season-ending leg injury that was really ugly in that TCU game. Aubrey Burks, a scary injury that we still really don't know what happened. Was it his neck? Was it his head? What happened? Missed a game from that one. Tomas Remack, because he had his, was chop blocked. He missed 2 games, Houston and Oklahoma State. And Wyatt Milam missed the Houston game the next week for getting eye gouged by that TCU defensive tackle. So West Virginia, unfortunately, paid the price from that TCU game, but ended up coming out with a win. So it was I'm trying to think about, was it Lord of the Rings? Was yeah, we won, but suffered heavy. Like when Aragorn went over the mountain against the Rough Riders on the wolves, and we paid for it with many lives to get. That's what I felt like after that TCU game. I don't know if you felt the same way, so let me know. Then we'll look at Houston and Oklahoma State, I feel like, in a vacuum, because they were, again, 2 close losses. That 48-34 result against Oklahoma State was a lot closer than the scoreboard showed. given the way the fourth quarter played out and a wacky one in Morgantown. I think what I'll take away from that one was the both physical and mental preparation around the bye week, and this can be said, I guess, for bye weeks looking back and moving forward, and how the margin for error in the Big 12 can really come down to one play, as many people have said many a times. I think the bye week in this case for West Virginia was just as much of a curse than it was a blessing, or even more so. Yes, it allowed West Virginia to heal up after, again, paying a pound of flesh in that TCU game. That West Virginia needed those 10 days to heal after winning down in Fort Worth and then having to go again on the road at Houston. But just the intensity and momentum that West Virginia had from those 3 consecutive wins at home, 2 at home, 4 in a row going back to Duquesne. Those 4 in a row wins, the intensity did not carry over into the Houston game. And you heard that in missions both by the coaching staff and the players post-game after that Houston game, that they overlooked Houston. They lacked energy by their 10,000 person crowd on a Thursday night in Houston. Houston coming in with a pretty paltry record. Even though you were going up against Dana Holgorsen, there wasn't really very few players on West Virginia's team who had any sort of animosity toward Dana Holgorsen because he'd been gone or multiple years even. So there wasn't really much of a factor, I felt like, between the coaches and the players on the field, just more so from the fans' perspective. And then just Neal Brown's conservative play calling there, especially in the first half, in the way that the defense couldn't bring it the same way that they could without Burks, without Lathan. These injuries were starting to mount up at this point in the season, despite the bye week. So I just think that this was a bad demerit against Neal Brown and the coaching staff of not having this team mentally and physically prepared in that Houston game. And again, as I'll say it, and this goes to my second point about games in the Big 12 coming down to one play, no matter the opponent, Garrett Green's unsportsmanlike penalty, unsportsmanlike conduct penalty for taking his helmet off after the Hudson Clement would have been game-winning touchdown. So, again, gave Houston enough field position to come up with one play for a chunk yardage to get you in field position to throw up that Hail Mary. If Green scores the touchdown, kicks the extra point, they kick off regular distance, kick it in the end zone, or get a touchback, there's no way Houston wins. West Virginia wins that game. So that's what I was upset with. And then from the Oklahoma State game, I said it then, and I'm still kind of ticked off about it now, Andrew Wilson-Lamp's boneheaded hit on Preston Fox in punt return coverage changed the whole complexion of the Oklahoma State game in the fourth quarter. I mean, we can argue that, I guess, until the cows come home, the way West Virginia tackled or covered Ollie Gordon down the stretch in the fourth quarter, and him rushing for so many yards, and Jaden Bray making an awesome play, taking out multiple defenders and scoring a touchdown. All that, yes, valid, totally valid. But again, West Virginia comes up with that ball after scoring a touchdown easily on its previous possession, getting a stop on defense, getting the ball back in the fourth quarter with the potential to go up multiple scores. That came down to that play. That's really what I feel like. And Andrew Wilson-Lamp shouldn't have been on the field for what he'd done, in previous weeks. So I'm glad that he's hit the transfer portal, sayonara, but I think we just got to look back on that play. And also that you need to have high-quality depth to compete for league titles, because at that point in that Oklahoma State game, I know you still had a few days extra to prepare for that after the Houston game, coming home I think that was the homecoming game, that West Virginia's D-line was tired and banged up. Its linebacking core was definitely banged up. And that's what you needed defensively against Oklahoma State in that game, to contend with an up-tempo rushing attack led by the nation's best running back in Mike Gundy, who I think is still one of the best coaches in college football. So Then we'll transition to the UCF games and BYU, which I think were the two most fun wins for the season, and those are the games I feel like I'm going to look back with most fondness, in addition to the bowl game. But being at the BYU game, that 37-7 blowout was awesome, and then watching that UCF game on television from start to finish. I think the thing you got to take away, more so I feel like from the UCF win than BYU, but turnovers. You have to be, as a West Virginia defense, and I'll talk about this at the end, an opportunistic defense from now on. And I thank you, Beanie Bishop, for coming away with those two critical interceptions, changing the complexion of the game for the Mountaineers to win that one, but turnovers. If West Virginia is going to continue to be this bend but don't break defense in the Big 12 under Jordan Leslie, it has to force turnovers. That's going to be the difference in wins or losses, no matter, I feel like, how your offense plays. And then rushing, as we learned at that point in time, West Virginia right up there with UCF as one of the top rushing teams in the entire country. And that's when West Virginia started to assert its dominance with using its offensive line, Green, and getting Jaheim White involved. I'll talk about Jaheim White in a second, and still C.J. Donaldson. So then Oklahoma, a 59-20 loss down at the Palace on the Prairie, the Sooners. And I think just what I'll take away from this is having, 12 years worth of history against Oklahoma. And again, Oklahoma's not Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, is that West Virginia can excel as a program in a conference without a blue blood. I think it was even closer because I know West Virginia had some really good games with Miami during Miami's heydays in the Big East, and West Virginia in that same conference. But I don't think it can compete for an entire season in winning a conference championship with blue bloods like Oklahoma and Texas in this conference. So that's a differentiating factor for me, is that it's a reality that we have to face as Mountaineer fans, is that I don't know if in this world of NIL and the transfer portal right now, the way the world works, is if West Virginia is ever going to contend with these these blue bloods, at least I would say in the four game playoff scenario. This 12 team, I want to see what happens if West Virginia has the opportunity and blessed to be as part of the 12 team college football playoff. But the way that the 2-game BCS was set up, or a 4-game playoff picked by a committee for up until 2024, like West Virginia and Oklahoma are just two separate programs, with one being a cut above the other from everything. Now, West Virginia can, on any given day, like we saw in the Fiesta Bowl or back in the 80s, go out and shock the world and beat the Sooners, or go out and beat Miami, or, Miami different light years prior now to what they are today, or beat Texas, or, beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, beat Clemson in the Orange Bowl, you name it. But it's just incredibly hard when you have those teams on your schedule and you're playing either 11 Power 5 opponents or in the Big 12 conference. It's just hard that you have to have not only star power, you have to have quality depth on both the offensive and defensive sides of the ball, and you can't make boneheaded plays, on special teams, but anywhere. Turnovers, you name it. So I was just really, really deflated after that Oklahoma game, and I don't know how you feel about what I just said there, but I'm glad they're out of the conference and that West Virginia doesn't have to play them anymore. Moving on, Cincinnati and Baylor in 2 games that I said were really must-wins for Neal Brown after the way West Virginia had lost against Oklahoma, and then having already Houston, Oklahoma State, and Penn State as losses on the schedule. So having to finish out and get these 2 wins against the basement dwellers of the Big 12 Conference this year. And I think what I'll take away from those 2 games is that Jaheim White can be someone special. That I think we can respect both Jaheim White and C.J. Donaldson separately, but also as a pair, as a thunder and lightning pair, and that it's a symbiotic relationship between the two, and I think that West Virginia can find ways to keep everybody healthy, or keep everybody happy with total number of carries and involvement, They're stat chasers, don't get me wrong, and I think that skill position players are. But Jaheim White just showed the kinds of speed that I don't think C.J. Donaldson will ever have. They're two different backs. They're totally two different backs. And I haven't seen a West Virginia running back have the kind of like get around the edge kind of speed like Jaheim White has in a while, in a very long time. So really, really impressed by the true freshman. Looking more and more, I feel like, a 4 or 5 star find by Neal Brown and staff to get him onto the team. So keeping him, on the payroll in retention, hugely important, I feel like, for 2024. And then also, just something's got to give with this defense that goes beyond both talent and depth from what West Virginia was doing. I'll talk about turnovers again later. I've already talked about it a little bit. But at this point in the season, you kind of knew what you were going to have with your your stars, and what you were going to have given your depth purposes, and everybody by that point in the season is going to be banged up and injured. But going against Cincinnati and going against Baylor in the type of defensive performances that were given or that were played out in both of those games, that there has to be something different. And I think you finally found that in what I'll talk about in the Duke's Mayo Bowl against North Carolina, in a 30-10 victory in which you can really look ahead. I feel like you can't take away too much from what I already talked about in the recap video, and since I did that yesterday, you can go back and watch that video for full context of that game. But what I would say offensively from that game is that Neal Brown, Chad Scott, and Garrett Green will have to look toward developing some sort of intermediate passing game, and Garrett Green becoming more comfortable playing from within the pocket. You can see that in, like I said, over the back half of the season, and really impressed with the strides that he made over the back half of the season to not rush it and get so juiced and amped up and just fire it as hard as he possibly can downfield and either overthrow a wide receiver or throw it too high, just be a little bit inaccurate. He's a great deep route thrower, like one of the nation's leaders in big-time throws that we talked about was a pro football focus stat. But we didn't see a lot this year out of Garrett Green, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think it might just be due to his size, not being the tallest quarterback out there, and being almost a head shorter, I would think, than Doug Nestor or Wyatt Milam, some of these bigger offensive linemen out there. So to play from within the pocket and throw some slant routes, throw some out routes. He usually has to do it off an RPO or just design play action pass where he rolls out. So can he become comfortable, on a 3-step drop or, just out of a shotgun, quick passes, dinking and dunking, and trying to develop more of that part of West Virginia's offense, because I think that's what's going to pay dividends as the wide receivers get better, and I'll talk about that later. Let's go back to what I was just talking about defensively with Cincinnati and Baylor. I think you have to be more aggressive, and what I'll say by that happening is what we saw from the Duke's Mayo Bowl is not only you get turnovers forced, you're going to have to be more aggressive in that area, and rather than just sitting on zone coverage, being reactive and passive versus proactive and going out, crushing wide receivers as soon as they touch the ball in coverage, or making interceptions, pass deflections, this, that, and the other thing. You can't just sit back and wait for you got to dictate the terms, I feel like, sometimes to some offenses, especially ones that you have equal to or better talent than. And then more creative, unique, deceptive design blitzes. West Virginia did that phenomenally, I feel like, in 2008 when West Virginia went against Oklahoma and Sam Bradford. I know, totally different coaching staff, totally different players, and also a totally different game from 2008 to 2023. But just, if you watch some of these awesome defenses across college football, Alabama's the one that always comes to mind for me, or LSU. Maybe not this year's LSU's defense, but just guys in the secondary who are crumb-upping and either crushing wide receivers as soon as the ball comes near them, or they're reading the routes, jumping the routes, intercepting the ball, taking it back to the house, or a front seven, and namely on the defensive line, that stunts or that sends a secondary guy like Marcus Floyd did great in that Duke's Mayo Bowl game, come and weave in with the defensive ends or defensive tackles and just show different looks. And again, that confuses quarterbacks. So I think coming up with some sort of zone blitz scheme, like I think back to like some of the Steelers' heydays, that West Virginia, like I think this whole coaching staff needs to huddle up, get into a retreat over like this off season and figure out how in this 3-3 stack, it's not a 4-2-5, it's not 4 down linemen and 2 linebackers and 5 defensive backs, it's a 3-3-5. That the bandit is like another outside linebacker, and maybe you have the perfect one in Tyron Bradley for next year. Loved what I saw from him, and also Tamia Durwaje on the defensive line for not only the Mayo Bowl, but in totality for the season. So with them having that opportunity in 2024, again, can WVU's defense come up with something different to look different, show different looks, and be better, even better than they were this season? And I'll talk about some of the things that they achieved, I feel like, in just a little bit. But just that's what I'll take away from that Mayo Bowl game. So a topic that everybody loves to, on social media, go and argue against is, what has Neal Brown shown in 5 years? How has West Virginia improved? It's constant. And like, I know it happened in a lot of the losses, but we finally have some tangible evidence, I feel like, after this 2023 season is over. The offensive line proved to be one of the best units in the country. Garrett Green's rushing ability, C.J. Donaldson in tandem with Jaheim White just made for one of the most formidable rushing offenses in all of college football this year. And yes, you can play with the numbers, any way you want, the rushing in detriment to the passing, and like, okay, I can understand that. And again, looking at the way that West Virginia performed in the back half of the season versus the front half of the season, totally different conversations, or at least, Houston beyond, maybe first 5 versus last 7, not necessarily half and half, but just West Virginia was a really good rushing team. And I think got to give kudos to Matt Moore and his development of these offensive line pieces, Chad Scott and Neal Brown's play calling for pushing the right buttons at times to run the ball effectively. I would say also, and I talked about this in a video a few weeks ago, clock management, timeout usage, and penalties all improved for Neal Brown and staff this year. You weren't seeing that as frequently as you had been in years past of West Virginia having to burn a timeout, coming out of a break, coming out of a quarter, so on and so forth, and just like unnecessary timeouts that you needed at different situations down the road that you didn't end up having. And then penalties. West Virginia improved in that area. I think 4 fewer on average for 40 yards fewer on the season. And that was, a few games ago, so that number might have, I think get skewed because of the Mayo Bowl especially, but West Virginia was much better on penalties than they had been in previous years. The aggressiveness to go for it responsibly. West Virginia just, I think, like right behind Texas Tech, who's probably the most aggressive team in all of the Power 5, West Virginia and Neal Brown deciding to go for it on 4th down, trusting the analytics more rather than just his willingness to play conservative and kick field goals. That's not a narrative, I feel like, anymore. We can end that. I think West Virginia, Neal Brown learned something in that regard this year, not punting on 4th and an inch inside the 40s, even though you're on your side of the field against Pitt. Now you're going for that, trying to play to win the game and not lose it. And also, I would just say I'll give Neal Brown and staff credit for finally coming to fruition that I don't think either of the previous 3, maybe even 3 staffs, somewhat here and there with Tyler Urban, the utilization of the tight end. Getting Cole Taylor involved, I think, finally legitimized the position as a pass catcher, not just a run blocker. And Cole Taylor shined this year. Really impressed by him, and really, I think, like, Neal Brown, prophesied for years, I felt like, getting the tight end more involved, and finally they had the guy to do it in Cole Taylor, and I can't wait to see what he's going to do in 2024. Really excited about him. Last thing I'll say is now I think you definitely have a West Virginia Mountaineer who will be drafted in the NFL draft, no doubt, and Zach Frazier, and 3 guys who I think will warrant really, really strong looks, depending upon how they test and evaluate and this, that, and the other thing. Beanie Bishop for sure I would say lean on the possibility of being drafted, especially the way he played in that Mayo Bowl. But also, I look at Lee Koba, look at what he consistently did, but maybe just not necessarily having the size, being a little undersized at, just over 6 foot, 235 pounds. Can he hold up at middle linebacker in the NFL, where you usually be over, 6'2", 250? And then Doug Nestor. Did it for 4 years consistently. Might be like a Colton McKivitz situation, gets drafted late. I think McKivitz was a 5th rounder, but could Nestor be that same kind of mold and be a guy who's trusted for his pass blocking and then go out and do it for, as a beginning out, maybe as a backup somewhere at some team, and then find his way, onto the field either due to injuries or just, the way the teams manage it, their salary caps and things like that. So that's a few guys. Let's look at predictions. 40 minutes in now here. I said beginning of the season that West Virginia would be 8-5 with a bowl game victory. I switched that during my week-to-week picks and saying that West Virginia would beat Baylor. Given the way Baylor turned out, I originally said preseason that West Virginia would lose to Baylor. But in actuality, look at that. West Virginia 9-4 with a bowl victory, 1 game better than even I predicted. And I was one of the people who was more inclined to say West Virginia was going to have a good season. I mean, if you ask some of these media pundits out there who are always wanting to, sit on the fence, don't want to have to make any sort of a bold determination one way or another, and just kind of like sit in the mid, I was the one who said that like West Virginia should have the expectations to win 8 games. Either 7-5 and win in a bowl victory, or get to 8 wins in the regular season as they did, and potentially lose a bowl game, but they ended up winning it. So the media expectations in the preseason was trash, was absolute trash, and I would still hold all of those people accountable who I have said on previous videos who are out there, and you can't trust them because they don't know what they're talking about on West Virginia football. Not as much like some of the local guys. I'll talk about the national guys, on CBS's, Barstool, Sirius, so on and so forth, who just don't know West Virginia to the level that some of the guys, West Virginia, Twitter and those guys know it. But even some of those, I won't name them by names, but like, again, I was one who said that 8 wins should be an expectation and was consistent all year. So there you go. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just saying, to put it in context for you, that like West Virginia achieved expectations. Maybe overachieved by getting to 9, but like 8 should have been there. So it's warranted. There shouldn't be torches and pitchforks coming to Neal Brown's house trying to fire him like most people were thinking after the 2022 season. Instead, reached expectations. He deserves his job for 2024. So looking at it offensively and defensively, and West Virginia offensively, unfortunately, for as much strides as they made, didn't get there. I said preseason that my goal for the West Virginia offense is that they would average 33 points per game. After their so-so performance in the Duke's Mayo Bowl, they ended up at 31.5, so a 1.5 shy. They did crush my rushing prediction of over 200 yards per game, definitely outpaced that at 229 rushing yards per game. Got to give them a lot of kudos there for that. And also, looking at the quarterbacks, Garrett Green, Nico Marchiol, my prediction was, and like my benchmark was, could they beat what Geno Smith did as a passer in 2010 when he was a first-year starter? And you're looking at Geno's numbers, 2730 passing yards with 24 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. I said that the two would combine for 2,400 pass yards and 900 rush yards. They beat it. I'm really impressed. Look at their actuals, 2653 passing yards with 18 touchdowns passing, so a few fewer than what Geno had in 2010, but got to 905 yards rushing and 14 touchdowns on the ground. So I think that makes up for the 6 fewer that they had in the passing game, making up for it in the rushing department. So I think that only shows that West Virginia as an offense can be even better in 2024. I won't dive into that, but I think like right now, if you had to make me give a prediction, that West Virginia could be one of the top 20 scoring offenses in the country, and you look at it, I think around 35 points per game. That's where teams this year are falling. 35 points per game gets you into the top 20. So more to be had there. We'll talk about that in the future. Defense, you did get there. Wow. For as much like how critical I've been against this defense at times, especially for the back 7 games of the season, you did, as a unit, I feel like beat my expectation of 27 points per games allowed on average at 26 points per game. It really helped because of that Mayo Bowl. So, and also improved in the turnover department. 16 turnovers forced, still just tied for 78th in the country in that statistic. So even more to be had there. Did have 11 interceptions. Thank you, Beanie Bishop. But looking back, you cannot use this as an excuse in 2022, having just 10 turnovers forced, only had 4 interceptions. So made strides. Again, thank you, Beanie Bishop, in that department from 2022 to 2023. So improving there. You just got to get better. You got to get better from here on out. And that side. And I think some of the things I've already talked about, being more deceptive with your blitz scheming and being more aggressive, you can do that. So let's look at the position groups, position group by group, and what I really, really like and take away from those. Really liked with Garrett Green's deep ball passing ability for the season and his rushing ability and what that was able to complement for the entire offense this season. And then Nico Marchiol's backyard brawl and Texas Tech home wins. I don't think the numbers really mean anything there. It's that, and then people always argue this, is wins a quarterback stat? But Nico won you the game at Oklahoma State last year, wins the backyard brawl, wins against Texas Tech. So just continues to stack those accolades. I feel of why, he deserves to be a Power 5 starter. And West Virginia starter, who knows when that very could, as soon as that could be. In the running backs department, I'm a big C.J. Donaldson guy. Big defender, have been all season. And you might look at his numbers and say 171 attempts, 798 rushing yards with 11 touchdowns, so just 66.5 yards per average for a game for the season. Took a step backwards in year 2. I don't necessarily think so. I know, he did get hurt in the Oklahoma State game, and I think allegedly tore his labrum, so then that impacted his performance for both Cincinnati and Baylor. I mean, he was still a hammer. He's still the hammer, and again, how, much trouble West Virginia had through the first 5.5 games of the season with throwing the ball downfield, and teams, as I talked about that part of the season, selling out to stop the run and stopping Donaldson. So that was the game plan for so many defenses. Texas Tech, TCU's, Houston's, just selling out to stop C.J. Donaldson and forcing Garrett Green to beat you through the air and with his legs. And thankfully he did that at points over the back half of the season. But I don't think anything can be taken away for C.J. Donaldson. And now with the compliments of Jaheim White next to him and a stout running offensive line coming back in 2024, that I think that he can even ascend even higher than what he's put together in these first 2 seasons as a junior. Jaheim White, talked about him enough. Sensational, 842 rushing yards for the season and 4 touchdowns. Deserved of the freshman All-American accolades that he's received. And Green, 772 rush yards, 13 touchdowns, the most rushing touchdowns of any quarterback in the Power 5. Sensational of what they did as a group. I know he's not a running back, but you can talk about it in the context with the running back group. I think at wide receivers, Devin Carter's presence really settled the position group while it was in flux during the first half of the season when Cortez Bram, Jeremiah Aaron, and Jashawn Polk really quit on the team. All 3 are in the transfer portal at this point in time. We were looking at those 3 guys preseason to potentially be impact players for this 2023 season and really didn't. Instead, you saw the emergence of Traylon Ray, Hudson Clement as West Virginia's 1-2, and Preston Fox had some big-time moments. So can really be a counted-on 3-4 wide receiver looking ahead for 2024. I think he made some huge strides as a 4th-year player. But I would say for this wide receiver group, if I could give them any words of advice for next season, is the Blur Boys just need to continue to work on their route trees to create better separation in 2024. We got some speed, no doubt. I'm not going to argue that. Have some really great speed, and that's what Neal Brown recruits to. But DeLon Marshall, who's a 30 under 30 wide receivers coach, needs to go out there and work with these guys better on their route running ability to create more separation, because they have the speed, and that's one of the two ways that you create separation, is either with speed or great route running ability. And you just saw at times where teams were able to match West Virginia stride for stride in the speed department from their secondary and just defense as a whole. But can some of these guys be better in their route running abilities to create more separation, more catches, more yardage, especially in the development of that intermediate game, which I have already talked about for 2024. At tight end, Cole Taylor, 35 catches, 444 yards, and 4 touchdowns, legitimized the position as a pass catcher. Already said this. Offensive line, again, confirmed what we thought they could be. One of the best units in the country. So kudos to them and Zach Frazier, and a long career and healthy career in the NFL. Now let's talk about the defense. I thought the defensive line, best way to put it, was inconsistent. I think, again, solid in the front five. Pitt, Texas Tech, TCU, even that Cincinnati game, and then the Mayo Bowl at the end of the year. But not good enough against Penn State, Houston, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Baylor. So looking at this defensive front for next year, I like Martin on one side. I like Diriget on the other side. So in the middle, do they go lighter at nose tackle with Vesterinen, who started this entire year? Or do you go heavier with Mulba and a rotation with Hammond Russell and maybe a newcomer? I don't know. If you're going to stick with that instead of going to a true front four, 2 defensive ends and 2 tackles on the inside, like I've been talking about, and I think they can do. But I don't think that's what this defensive staff, with the same cast of characters, namely with Jordan Leslie, a defensive coordinator, is going to do, going to stick with what they've always done. So for the linebackers, I'll just say, my 2 words that I'll say to summarize this group this year is this was a group that really battled adversity. One, you lost Josiah Trotter, your big 4-star recruit, in the spring due to an ACL tear. Don't have him for the year. You never saw Tyrick Austin Cave. I don't know what happened, injuries, why he wasn't necessarily used, but that's what you got out of him. Nothing this year. Jairo Favaris got hurt middle of the year, but again, I don't know if he's necessarily a Power 5 player, even at this point in time in his development. So didn't really add too much for you at that position. You lost Trey Lathan, who looked awesome. I will say I felt like the players with the most potential of what we saw, that we thought weak side linebacker was going to be one of the weaknesses, the biggest gaps in this West Virginia defense. No. Trey Lathan answered those questions quickly. I felt like game 1 and all the way through the TCU game when he got hurt, looked like the fastest linebacker on the field, even faster than Koba, closing speed, especially laterally. It looked great. I love that he's coming back for 2024. And then Koba, awesome. The only thing that I'll say is it just sucked that he had to play every single snap, could never get a breather. And he put up numbers. Once again, 97 tackles, 7.5 for loss, 3 sacks, a forced fumble, 8 quarterback hurries. He was the man. He was absolutely, for 2 seasons that West Virginia had him, a heart and soul, I feel like, in the middle of this defense, following in the footsteps of Tony Fields a couple of seasons ago. Love and can't thank Koba enough for what he contributed for this program for 2 seasons. And then just looking at the Bandit linebackers, which again, I can argue I don't think this season were really deployed correctly in some of these games. Jared Bartlett put up okay numbers, and Tyron Bradley, for the opportunities that he did get onto the field, played well. But really never committed to James Hurd Jr. as a pass rushing specialist, which I thought that's kind of what this Bandit position is. No, not necessarily for what we've saw for most of this season. And then impressed Ben Cutter, finishing 4th on the team in tackles, 56, 6 for loss, and 2 sacks. So a stout, true freshman who will only play even more, I feel like, in year 2 in this defense. Then at the defensive backs, I feel like even though that this pass defense as a group finished in the bottom third of the nation in passing yards allowed, yet everybody really played well. Beanie Bishop talked about ad nauseum, that he was an all-American performer. Malachi Ruffin maximized his potential in his 6th year, being a previous true walk-on. Aubrey Burks put up another good year after putting up a good year last year. Marcus Floyd, Hershey McLaurin, who's unfortunately in the transfer portal, and Anthony Wilson. So you made strides and turnovers forced, which I had already talked about. I just felt like what happened in the back half of this season was what plagued West Virginia in 2022. As the injuries mounted up and Jordan Leslie chose to either A, not be as aggressive enough as he needed to be in my perspective, or just didn't have either capable or healthy enough guys in the front 7 to be as aggressive as needed. And then the secondary guys were forced to do too much than what they had to do, especially at the safeties, in run defense, but also in pass defense, and then got exposed at some points in time. So I'm not going to take much away from that secondary. I'm giving them a passing grade for this season if I have to put a grade on it. And I think they all played well respectively at their positions, and it's going to be really hard to place. That's going to be it seems like it's been the theme for the last how many years? 4 years, replacing both Beanie Bishop and Malachi Ruffin, so really 2 starters, either for next year in Montre Miller or a combination of Aiden Garnes, TJ Crandall, or Jacoby Spells, who will be a rising junior for this program. So that's what I'll have to say about the secondary. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I just had to say about that. At the kickers, Michael Hayes was a find. A grade in the transfer portal. Loved what I saw out of his kicks, especially in the Texas Tech and TCU game that were huge. Ollie Straw built upon what I feel like is soon to be an all-conference season in 2024 at punter, and what he's able to do, drilling punts inside the 20 or kicking ball over 50-plus yards, or even targeting guys on return units to knock it off their foot in the Duke's Mayo Bowl and get a fumble for West Virginia. So what I'll say is I think in the kick return and punt return had a little more to be desired. Preston Fox at times, performing admirably. He was doing well. And then I think that BYU game that is just average kind of dipped and fell out of, I think, what was top 20 in the country. Then you bring in Beanie Bishop for the last game in the Mayo Bowl, and he runs the punt back. So I just think there could and kick return, you didn't have any kick returns for a touchdown this year, and just doing okay in that department. So I wonder if West Virginia gets some new kick and punt returners involved in 2024. Do we see Jaheim White used there? Rodney Gallagher was used in the Mayo Bowl. So what do we see there? In kickoff coverage, oh my gosh, this is where I can't give a passing grade to. After the 2 touchdowns against Baylor, the one in Houston, either West Virginia needs to commit to a kicker, or either it's Hayes or going out and finding a guy like they did in Growth. I can't forget his last. I think it's Growth or something. A year prior in 2022 from Florida State, he was a transfer, a guy who's just going to boot the ball into the end zone every single time for a touchback. And that's what I think you need to commit to. Not playing the let's try and coffin corner kick it to get a short return and get your coverage. Just boot the ball through the end zone, start at the 25 and start the series. I'm done with this praying, hoping and praying every single time an opponent takes a kickoff that they're not going to return it for a touchdown. Just unnecessary in college football. So in summary, I'm not going to recognize for the totality of this 2023 season any crap talking from Pitt fans or Virginia Tech fans or anybody else who's a fan of college football, about West Virginia, when West Virginia had a media projected top 10 most difficult schedule in the country and then won 9 games. I'm not going to hear any of those arguments. Not when you have teams in the Big Ten and ACC, sans Florida State, excluding Florida State, but some of these teams in the Big Ten Conference and ACC Conference pounded on some bottom feeders, just like West Virginia did on its schedule, and a win is a win is a win, and they're pounding their chest from the results of their schedule, so why can't West Virginia too? And say this was an overachieving job by Neal Brown and staff. So, not going to hear those arguments. Yes, I can recognize the context of the schedule, and I've talked about it week in, week out, including this video. Every win matters, and West Virginia was inches away from 2 more wins. Houston, and Oklahoma State. I'm still salty about the Houston loss. Sorry, but I am, and if you feel the same way, I'd love to hear your comments here on YouTube. Not only for beating Dana Holgorsen, who's now fired at Houston, but just in the context of this season, that was a win you should have had, undoubtedly. But I think winning the backyard brawl and being able to talk that over to Pitt fans now until September 14th is going to cover the wound just enough that I'm feeling okay. So, and I'm feeling good about this season again. Winning the Mayo Bowl, winning 9 games, this, that, and the other thing. So, let's look at my list. What Neal Brown needs to do to finish this video between now and next season to put himself in the best position to be successful in 2024. Because after hearing over an hour now's worth of stuff from me, you've got to be thinking to yourself, okay, Carson, 2024 is just, 3-4 days away? So we're already looking ahead to 2024. Like, chapter and page turns quickly, and we're looking ahead. I wanted to record this video as soon as possible so nothing happens in the transfer portal and it puts anything like I've talked about, out of context here. So looking at the indispensable list, West Virginia's done a really good job in retention already with Country Roads Trust to sign some players for 2024. 4 guys I'm now looking at: Nico Marchiol, CJ Donaldson, Sean Martin, and Aubrey Burks. That's who I'm keeping my eyes on. Well, and Anthony Wilson too. I'll put him a part of that group, so make that 5. Yeah, I think I had him on my indispensable list that West Virginia's got to retain for next year. So, can West Virginia keep those guys in an old gold and blue uniform for 2024? Check, but check the box there and for retention purposes for all of the others. So happy there. Just not 3-quarter check. Last corner is going to be important. Number 2, win the bowl game. You did it. You ended 2023 on a positive note into the offseason. My third thing, finding another gem in the 2024 high school class. You did that in 4-star wide receiver Day Farmer and improving that overall Rivals recruiting grade for the season. And we talked about that a few videos ago on National Signing Day, December 20th. So you can go back and watch that video and get my full thoughts on all of West Virginia's 2024 commits. West Virginia replenishing the depth and upgrades in the transfer portal. Again, at cornerback, I thought was number 1 first and foremost. And then if both Zach Frazier and Doug Nestor are moving on for next season, what does West Virginia do at those 2 positions? And then on the interior defensive line, again with Mike Lockhart moving on, I think that opens up an obvious hole at that position. We don't know yet necessarily about safety, depending upon what happens with Burks and Wilson. So getting Zach Frazier drafted, Beanie Bishop probably too. I think that will go, because that's what these high school recruits and that's what everybody wants to see is, can you contend for national championships or at least conference championships, win games, and then develop me, improve me, not only pay me with NIL, but get him into the NFL and secure the bag in the NFL. So that's hugely important for, I feel like, West Virginia's continued recruiting efforts. Important there. I already talked about this enough. I think making a defensive philosophy schematic change, especially with the bandit position and how West Virginia either deploys a 4-2-5 versus a 3-3-5 and sticking with it and being more aggressive with its schemes. And you're going to have to hire a new safeties coach, Dante Wright, heading off to Troy to be their new defensive coordinator with his childhood friend Gerard Parker. Sorry, missed the name of there. I know he was West Virginia's OC a few years ago, but yeah, now being the head coach at Troy, Dante Wright looks like he's going to be the defensive coordinator for the Trojans, so you'll have to replace a safeties coach there. And then I think the last thing, and this is big too, again, all about recruiting, pulling in a big fish or 2 out of the 2025 high school recruiting class. And the guy that I'm looking at already has West Virginia in his top 5, Deshaun Burnett, 4-star, 6'3", 220-pound outside linebacker from Amani Christian High School in Pittsburgh. So can West Virginia get a head start on this 2025 recruiting, pull out and really get this program moving in the right direction? I feel like getting some studs to again raise the floor up an entire level. So that's it. that's my thoughts on the entire 2023 season. Love to hear yours. Leave a comment here on YouTube. Like it so more Mountaineer fans can see it across YouTube and other social medias. If you like this video, go back and watch some of my others. I'd love to have you as subscribers to my channel as we enter into 2024 and look ahead. There will be a lot still to talk about over this off season. Put 2023 to bed. Look ahead to 2024. So I'd love to have you as a subscriber. Really appreciate you. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog that I do this. Not necessarily now, each and every week as the season, but during the season especially. And I have a lot of fun doing it. So hail West Virginia. Go Mountaineers. Glad for a 2023 season.